Privet Katila, CEO of Racism here. Just kidding, it's Wandering Ruski Desu. And today I wanted to respond to a post that a affluent white female liberal posted on her Instagram story. No surprises on the culprit here. Now, the reason I wanted to respond to this certain Instagram post on the story is because I think it puts together all the arguments, well, most of the arguments that the so-called anti-racists would make in response to certain arguments that would come, from our side. So let's respond to a few of these claims that were made. So the first argument that they are responding to is, quote, maybe if they weren't breaking the law, they'd still be alive. And this argument basically is a very simple logic to it. Don't be involved in criminal activity and you won't see the police as much. It's almost like saying 2 + 2 = 4. Progressives always bitch like, oh, well, you don't see all these types of police in the suburbs with all the McMansions. You don't see the cops there. Well, yeah, honey, because no one is committing crime in those neighborhoods. Now, the rebuttal to the argument that, if they weren't breaking the law, they'd still be alive is that, oh, well, look at all these people. They weren't committing a crime and they got killed. First off, a lot of people who are in that wall of text were committing a crime. That's why the police were even called in the first place. But let's say none of them were committing a crime. The main reason why people get shot by the police is because of their behavior towards the police, how they act with the police. It has nothing to do with why the police were called on them or what their past criminal behavior is. It has everything to do with how they act with the police. And the majority of the time, the police were responding to a bullish retard who's trying to act macho and or it's some horrible misunderstanding, like with the Tamir Rice case. Very rarely do the cops unjustifiably in a criminal way shoot someone. Fundamentally, though, it did not respond to the underlying argument that the best way to avoid cops is just not be a criminal, which a lot of these people were. And even if a few weren't involved in crime, it comprises just a small sample of the overall total, and it has everything to do with how you act with the police. You could be some marauding, murdering rapist, but if you surrender peacefully, you'll be arrested and given a court trial. Doesn't matter your race. And if you roughhouse with the cops, you'll be fucked and shot, no matter what your race is. And no matter what crime you're doing beforehand. So I'll address the bottom point in the next argument. Alrighty, so the second argument that they try to address is about what about black on black crime? So when people make the what about black on black argument, this is aimed straight at Black Lives Matter, who claim that black people are just murdered on the streets by police every day for no reason. So if you care about black people dying by police, then surely you would care 10 times more in the case where other black people are dying by other black people, right? Because that takes the lives of blacks much more. So what their argument against the black on black crime is say that's racist, and say it doesn't specifically address police brutality, and then they also throw in what about white on white crime. So okay. This might be the most retarded response out of all the responses we're going to see in this video. So let's look at some data. Let's look at some facts and logic. First, this is according to the Washington Post, which is a liberal newspaper. First, in 2019, there were about 1,000 people who died in police encounters. About 250 of those were black, 403 were white. All right, we also know that not every single police shooting was unjustified. So let's just take all the unarmed suspects and assume none of them attacked or wrestled with the police or resisted arrest. Let's just assume all unarmed were unjustified killings. So in 2019, that was 25 unarmed white people who were shot and 14 unarmed black people who were shot. Now, if we take all shootings since 2015 to now, there were 1,298 blacks who were shot and killed, and there was 2,485 whites who were shot and killed. In terms of unarmed, and thus we assume the unjustified cases, there was 146 who were white and 123 who were black. In total, in all cases since 2015 to now, there were 5,437 people who were shot and killed by police. Alright, so how many black men die from other black men? According to the CDC, there were 19,510 homicides in 2019 alone. Blacks commit about 52% of all murder in this country, according to the FBI crime statistics. And over 90% of those murders are done by another black guy. So let's round down some numbers to about 50%. And so that's about, say, 9,755 black people who were killed by other black people. So let's compare the numbers. In 2019, all black people in total who were shot were 250. Of those in 2019, the unarmed cases were 14. 14 unarmed blacks were shot and killed in 2019. From 2015 to mid-2020, all blacks were shot were 1,298. From 2015 to mid-2020, all blacks who were unarmed and shot, so the unjustified cases we're assuming, is 123. And all police shootings since 2015 to now, in total, for all races, of all backgrounds, of everything, 5,437 from 2015 to now. Knowing this data, this is why we know Black Lives Matter is a fraud and its priorities are completely off. This is why people say, what about black on black crime? Because even if you assumed that every single shooting done since 2015 to 2020 was to a black person, and every single one of those cases was unjustified, you would still come short to the amount of black people who were killed by other blacks in the single year of 2019 alone. If you want a real apples-to-apples comparison of black people murdered versus unarmed black men shot by the police in 2019, that is 14 compared to 9,755. When people bring up black-on-black crime to Black Lives Matter people, it's because if you truly cared about black lives, then you would care much more about the killings of blacks within their community and the high crime rate within it, but you don't. And white-on-white crime has nothing to do with any of this, you fucking retard. And if this was also just because of police brutality, it's like, well, you see, we're just nebulously about police brutality. If you think about that specifically, then I'm sure you will make twice as big of an outrage over the white victims who were shot and killed, right? Because that's what we saw with the data. But of course, you're not. All right, so the third argument is their response to when people say white privilege isn't real. In response to this, they say that people who say this have white privilege, and that because of historic and present biases, black people have it hard specifically because of their skin color. All right, so the short answer is no. So when it comes to how well you succeed in modern-day America, it is a much bigger indicator of how you do as an individual than some nebulous societal bias or nebulous government bias that holds you back. You know, Asians used to have unfair laws targeting them, but now in the modern era, they earn much more than whites, aren't in the criminal justice system disproportionately as much, get good lives, have good educations, and it's because of how they conduct themselves in American society. The reason why the black community or someone who is black does not get ahead in modern-day America on average is solely because of his or her actions. They have everything in the world handed to them. You know, they have affirmative action to get into college and get jobs with lesser qualifications than their whiter Asian peers. They have special government grants and private scholarships to help them with social assistance. You know, the government has poured trillions disproportionately into, black neighborhoods for the past 50 years. And what is the result? We still have riots, we still get moaning, and we still get whining. When you have people like LeBron James and Colin Kaepernick who make millions, live in mansions, and live in the lap of luxury and abundance because they throw or dribble balls around, and yet they could still protest, speak up, and talk trash about American white people, then we simply do not live in a country of black oppression. Black people's skin color does not hold them down in modern-day America. It is their individual actions that do. Start treating black people as human beings and expect the same thing from them as you would any other community, instead of excusing all their faults as evidence of racism and oppression. Alright, so the next argument is about the response to Blue Lives Matter, saying that, well, Blue Lives Matter isn't a race. So when people say Blue Lives Matter, it's basically the argument how police officers of all races get shot and killed in the line of duty protecting us from crime and disorder and anarchy. And it's usually done by some low-life criminal. Black people commit 35% of all police shootings, by the way. So just because it is a job does not mean the people who stand in the way between crime and civilization and sometimes get killed, they don't matter. They do. They do matter. And as mentioned, black people aren't getting shot or having a hard time because they're black. So this entire response was bullcrap. Now, in my personal opinion, all lives matter in the sense, so that's kind of my thing. But the thing is that, they're like, well, blue lives don't matter because, it's a job. So yeah, them getting killed doesn't matter. But black people are getting killed specifically because of their race, which, as we mentioned before, isn't happening. So wrong on everything. So the next argument that these people try to address is the I don't see color, thus I'm not racist. So the main argument is that that the responses to this is that not seeing race means you're ignoring discrimination. So my response to that is, honey, there is no discrimination. So the idea that being colorblind basically is if you treat everyone the same, then you should expect the same from them as anyone else. If a white man commits a crime, you hold him accountable. And if you do that, you must also do that with blacks. But you make all the excuses in the world for them and treat them as, and you don't treat them as people, and you treat them as people with no agency and who just, are just walking mindless robots who have no sense of self. Now, another thing that they bring up within this rebuttal is that, that if we become aware of racial differences very easily, and thus we make racial stereotypes, which is true because there is such thing as racial differences, but that's because biologically in our brains, no matter how much ideology poisons us, we can see the facts. If a young Asian guy walks up to me, I'm not going to be as on edge unless he does something than if a young black guy comes up to me. It's like saying to a woman that she should be equally concerned for an 80-year-old grandmother walking behind her as she should be for a young 25-year-old male. Why is she judging, they're doing the same thing, the 80-year-old and the 25-year-old. Well, why is she being more on edge strictly based on age and gender? Because of statistics, my dude. If as a community the blacks weren't involved in criminality, there wouldn't be a stereotype of them being more criminal and thus people being more on edge. So their next argument responds to a common slogan that says all lives matter. And their response to all lives matter is saying, well, you see, all lives do matter, but if a fire is burning down, a house and you yell all houses matter, that makes no sense. Which, is a good rebuttal if the underlying scenario was true, and the scenario being that black lives are specifically being targeted, it is not. As we brought out before, and I have said in other videos, more whites are shot by cops than blacks, and blacks get in trouble more because of crime rates and their behavior towards the police. So the whole notion that blacks are getting killed is wrong from the get-go. Thus, the premise that we need to say Black Lives Matter, because black lives are getting killed by police, the idea that the black people are getting killed by police more often is totally divorced from reality, and thus this whole house is burning scenario does not hold up. So the next argument addresses the affirmative action argument. And it's basically jam-packed, filled with baloney and bullshit. So first, they say that affirmative action does not give unfair advantages to minority groups, but merely makes fairer competition across the board. This is probably the most bold-faced lie out of everything we have seen thus far. You must be on another universe to make such a statement. Affirmative action comes, in a wide variety of policies, but generally what it does is that for minority applicants, despite a lower GPA score or SAT or ACT score, or any objective metric for the purposes of solely on their race, they can go into college or get a job with lesser qualifications than a white or Asian person. Now, they make a half-assed assertion that affirmative action is for people who are outside the loop and not in the elite, so it gives them a shot to join, the higher ranks of society. Which basically so basically what happens is that if you get grades and get on the top of things, you can improve your economic status. But now, making sure that people of lower income levels have the tools to succeed is important, I agree. But what you're defending affirmative action is what affirmative action is doing is giving preferences to children born in millionaire black families over the white kid who lives in a trailer park whose father died of an overdose and whose mother makes only $25,000 a year, and he goes to a shit school. So if you really wanted people out of the loop to get opportunity, you would focus on the poor, regardless of their skin color, instead of the current regime that gives blacks especially an unfair advantage, which again is a total mockery of the idea that we live in a white supremacist system. So affirmative action is not like it's to be fair baloney. And then the whole thing about, it's just there to help the disadvantaged. Well, if you wanted that, you would focus on the poor, not on rich black families. You would focus on the poor of all races, if that was your goal. So next they address the what about crime in Chicago argument, which even to me is a dumb argument. that I would never really use. Basically, the response to this is a rehash of the black on black argument. Blacks are victimized by other blacks in terms of murder, rape, and robbery and assault far more than they are by white people or cops. So again, this whole about Chicago argument, is basically against is basically just a rehash of the black on black argument, where what this proves basically is BLM cares more about being an anti-American, anti-white movement than they do care about black lives. Now, usually people who say about crime in Chicago are also like these conservative, like mainstream conservative types. And usually a good response, I'm going to give the leftists a bone here. You could say, well, Vermont and Maine are run by Democrats, but they're fine. But that's, again, it's all about race. It's not about political affiliation, but I don't think these anti-racist people want to address that. So the last argument that they try to address is, well, he had a criminal past and say that, well, just because they had, and their response to that is that just because they had a criminal past does not make them worthy of getting shot. And, I've heard this argument a lot, especially from people I know, like in real life. So here's the response. Again, it's like the first argument. It's not that it's not their background that matters in a police encounter. It's their behavior with the police that matter. You can be the most upstanding person in the world, but if you resist arrest, fight with the cops and act like an ass, you run the risk of getting shot. However, usually the ones who do these stupid occasions are those with large criminal backgrounds, and typically they have no sense of respect and try to act macho and don't respect authority, so they attack the cops. So when people say, well, they had a criminal past, they are saying his life choices lend themselves to where he will interact with the police more, be involved with the criminal justice system more, and thus the best way to avoid a bad outcome, whether in the 98% of cases where there is a justified shooting, or in the other 2% unjustified ones, the best thing to do is to be an upstanding citizen and not commit crime, and you will be fine. Again, it's not their background. At the end of the day, it's your behavior and how you act with the officers. There is a reason why, even after mass shootings, those who surrender peacefully get apprehended and arrested, and those who act foolish, even for a minor parking stop, get shot. It's all because of behavior. It's nothing about their criminal past or their crime. It's totally about their behavior, and when people talk about crime in general, it's this is a good rule of thumb to avoid the police. So that was my video. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you like and subscribe, and be sure to share this video around. So aim high, wander on, from America with Russian love.